Yesterday I got a little bit sidetracked. A friend came in and I'd put the gasket on with Hylamar and never came back for all afternoon. So unfortunately the gasket with the Hylamar on it, the old one, had dried up and it wasn't soft, so it wouldn't squidge about, so I'm not going to take the chance of using that one again. So I've got a new one, I've put that on. These gaskets actually are sold individually. If you want to buy them individually, you don't always have to have a full gasket kit like this, because sometimes you don't use all the gaskets. But they're really handy to have and they're pretty cheap. Now we're going to put the cover on. I've oiled everything up, everything's good to go. But there's one little thing I want to tell you, and it's this thing here. You see that thing? It's a little funky plastic, what would you call it, a trough? A lot of people miss this piece out. Where does it go? It goes here. Let's see if you can see that. It goes here in the gearbox from the inside, so you can't put it in really well. No, it's got a shoulder on it, so you can't put it in from the outside. It's got to go from the inside, and it goes through here. Now there's two holes in here, and one of them's got a little step on it. So what happens is this collects oil as the gearbox is, flaying oil all over the place, and it runs down this little chute and it feeds oil into, which was at the top, there's the top. So what it's going to do is it's actually going to feed oil into this bearing here, this oil seal. It's going to feed oil into there, which will drip down and eventually get back into the gearbox. So quite a clever piece of plastic. But if you haven't got it, the oil seal has got the opportunity to run dry, and also we need to get some oil on these front bearings, so it's quite an important piece of plastic. So don't forget to put it in. So I'm going to pop it in now. Get it. Right, it's tight. There we go. It's a bit tight, so I'm going to stop this video now, get this ready, and the next time we'll come back and we'll put the cover on. The reason why I couldn't get the little scoopy thing on is there's a part of the casting that it has to be twisted and then it just drops in, so it was my bad. But usually you don't take those out, but sometimes if you've had a severe gearbox explosion, that piece could get knocked off and you wouldn't know it was there, so it really is important. So the next thing we've got to make sure that everything is looking ship shape, and now we're going to put the cover on. Again, we have to sort of lift it up and wiggle it around a bit, make sure we've got everything in. Whoops. It's a bit difficult being so tall. Now I've missed. You can sort of get one piece in but not the other. My biggest problem is this big dowel here. So I'm going to go see if I can get it lined up. Oh, and then of course move the gasket. I'm going to have to take that dowel out. So I thought I could get the cover. I tried to put the cover on. I think I'll edit that bit out because it looked a bit. It looked like a very amateurish type of carry on. But I remember now that these dowels have to be a nice sliding fit in this casing, because if not, you're going to fight against them. And if you can remember, I had this dowel that was stuck in here. I got it out, but I had to damage it to get it out, but I put a replacement one in and it's fine. So what you really need to do, because what you're going to do is you're going to be fighting to try and get let's see this, if we can get this back up here. You're going to be fighting to get this through the hole, this through the hole, this lined up, this lined up, this lined up, and one round the back. And if we can eliminate two, well, it's not too bad. So we're going to push those dowels down just until it's time to line up the box. So this is going to be it. So here we go. And it is heavy, and I usually put these on the floor to do, so I'm putting it up here so you can see. So let's get the box going the right way around. Lift it up. It's like crowning the queen. Bring it down, gently, bently. It's as simple as that once you know how. And now you can push the dowels up, which will align the casings. They're really sort of critical. There we go, that's one in and that one's in. So now we can put some temporary bolts in, because we're going to start shimming up. So I'm going to put some bolts in here, and I'm going to show you how we're going to shim this up. I just remembered, this is an ideal time now to put this piece back in. So what we do with this, we just get a little bit of high-low sill. We're not using high-low mar, we're using high-low sill, black silicone. Always put the tops on tubes, because this stuff dries out really quickly. And we can see, I hope you can see, let's have a zoom in, see if you can see. Not that way, this way. Right, let's see if we can zoom in on that. Anyway, where's this going? If you can focus. If you can remember, on the Selector shaft there was a little shuttle. Well, this attaches to the shuttle inside, and we can just tap it in and just wiggle this, and it goes in. Then we can put the bolts in. Tighten them up. We're using silicone on there because it's a metal to metal surface. Tighten up. There. There, go. So that's that part done. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of drop this on the floor. Let's zoom out. Oh dear me, let me get the hang of this zooming thing. So what I'm going to do now is drop this on the floor, and we're going to put the cover on the end with a gasket, but no sealer. Alright? And we're going to show you how to shim this up, because it is kind of important. Just before I drop it on the floor, I just wanted to show you that I've taken the bolts out of the support off the stand, so it is a bit wibbly. Well, not wibbly wobbly, but it is. It could fall off. I've put a series of bolts clamping the plate to the cover, and that is so we can get the actual tension when we put the shims in, because this could squinch down a little bit if you haven't got these tightened up. What will happen is when you put the shims in and you tighten it all up, it'll get tighter still, because this has got a gap and it'll just want to compress, and it'll put all your settings out. So this side and the other side, put some bolts in and nip it down. Alright? In your gasket kit, you will have two gaskets. Where have you gone? There you go. You'll have two gaskets in your gasket kit. You've got to make sure that you've got the right one on. What is the difference? The top piece is exactly the same, but if I put one over the top, there you go, I've done that. If I put one over the top of the other, you'll see one's got a bigger aperture than the other one. Some of the later LT77s had bigger lay shaft bearings in, so you choose the one that will fit around the aperture. That's the small one. So it got to be this one's looking happy. So the next thing we're going to do, we're going to take the gasket off this cover and clean up the cover. That'll be a couple of minutes. You probably can't read on the bench what I've got down here, but I've just been playing around a little bit so that we can do a little bit of an experiment, because the original shims were 80 thou and 8.086, so 86 thou and 80 for the two shims off the original gearbox. But just to prove how it should be set up, I'm going to put some smaller shims in, and we're going to find out the distance between the two. Obviously the gasket thickness could be kind of crucial, and the tolerances are very fine. On the main shaft we should have 0 end float or 0 preload. On the lay shaft we are allowed 0.5 of an inch preload or 0.5 of an inch end float. See? So this is where it gets tricky. Building these gearboxes are not so easy as you think. And of course you need a nice selection of shims, usually all different sizes. These are things I've collected out of wrecked boxes over the years. But when it comes to shimming, I'm going to show you something different. But now we're going to put the end cover on and the bearings. We're going to have to take these on and off a couple of times, so I'm just going to give this a quick squirt of oil whilst we're playing around. So this is the main shaft bearing. There we go, see, it clicked into place. I should really take that gasket off, I'll move it out of the way. And this is the lay shaft bearing. And you can maybe see that the shafts are actually sticking out at different, they're not the shafts, the outer bearings are sticking out of the casing at different heights. If the shaft, when it's built up, is a little bit out of tolerance, then this is why we do shimming, to get it right. We can't guarantee that all the parts that go into the gearbox are going to be absolutely spot on, exactly the same as the other one. So there is a little bit of leeway, and this is why we do shimming. So I'm going to put the gasket on. I've cleaned up the housing so there's no more sealer, and I'm going to put the housing on like that, and then I'm going to put the bolts in. So this bit's a bit boring, so I'm going to halt it here. Before I put the end cover on, I'm going to, instead of working out what the heights are without any shimming, I'm going to just cut a little corner, because this video is running on a long time, and I'm going to put a shim inside this housing that's smaller, and this one is actually 70,000th of an inch. Okay, so that's for the main shaft, 70,000, and 83 instead of 86 for the lay shaft. Now what you've got to work out here sometimes is there's all different types of bearings. Over the years they change things, and this is why the suffix number, be it H, B, C, whatever it is, they changed the diameters. The early gearboxes were very small, and then they put bigger and bigger bearings in. Consequently, you've got to get bigger and bigger shims. So just be wary of that. But I'm going to show you a little trick in a minute that when we come to shimming it up, that's really handy. So I'm going to fit this cover on here. They've got the gasket on. We're not using gasket sealer because we're going to have to take the cover off again to change the shims. So I'm going to fit this, and then we'll turn the box upside down. So I put the front cover on, I put all 6 bolts in, I've tightened it down with the gasket, and now we've turned the gearbox back on upside down, so to speak. And now we're going to start to check the heights of the shafts. Now you can feel there's a bit of play in these, obviously because we put thinner shims in. So now's an ideal time to put the gear on the back of here and partially assemble this shaft. And the reason for this is that we need something to put the levers on to lever up the shafts, so we can measure quite accurately what the tolerances are. So trying to get a screwdriver under this shaft is very, very difficult. So we'll put the gear on and we'll see how it goes. So first of all, we're going to put the Selector shim in. Now this can be calculated using the workshop manual because there's different thicknesses of this synchro assembly here. Well, not different thicknesses, but this shim will bring everything up and down, so the circlip will go nicely in its groove, so that's really important. So what we're going to do first of all, we're going to fit the idler gear, and we're going to sort of push that down a bit, there, just like that. It's funny how it comes off with a puller, but it won't go back, it'll slip back on. And then we're going to put the old nut back on for now. Alright, we're going to put the old nut back on. We're not going to fasten it up monster tight, we're just going to fasten it up finger tight. Well, not finger tight, but we're just going to get a shifter and just give that a little nip like that. The next thing, we can put the split bearing on, like that, and then plenty of oil, we can put the gear on, like that. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, instead of assembling everything in the synchro, I'm just going to put a hose clip around this for now, just to hold it in place, because we have to force on the synchro hub using a press. The thing is that if we've made a mistake and we have to take it off again, then we have to go through all the stage of putting the hydraulic puller on. So I'm going to fit that, and then we're almost ready to calculate the shimming. So this is where it gets interesting, and this is why I use inch sizes, not metric, to calculate the thickness of the shims, because I've only got a very good quality dial gauge that's in inches. I really should get a metric one. So what you're going to do first of all, you'll need a couple of nice pry bars, a mag mount, really handy to have, preferably one that's a bit taller than this one, and you're going to put your gauge on sort of midway at the top, you know, sort of halfway. Now what you want to do first of all when you're setting up a gearbox is, you can see here we've put a hose clip on the shaft to hold that in place. That's nice and tight. But what we're going to do first of all is turn it, and if you could see there, you see how the gauge is dropped down to 90. Very important, because the bearings are settling down, you're taking all that tolerance out, and you'll understand it in a minute. I know. Sometimes, the first time I did it, it took me a long time to work this out. So what you're going to do is you're going to get a couple of pry bars, you're going to make a note of that 90. Well, no, I'll tell you what, we're going to do something even better. You see, if you've got a mag mount like this, it's got a little piece generally built into the side. Let's see if we can zoom in and see it. Right, you see this bit here? Well, it's a fine adjuster. So watch what happens. Whoa, I never get the hang of this. Watch what happens to the gauge when I adjust it, because I can do a very fine tuning and take it to 0. How clever is that, eh? So now, by lifting up the gear here, and at the opposite side use the old 5th gear as a pivot and put some pressure on, we can see that is gone to about 10 thou, which is perfect because that's exactly the same size as the shim it's got. So what you've got to do make a note of that. Get your pencil out or your Sharpie. Doesn't matter where you write it. Let's write it here. This was 10 thou. And what we've got to do, when we take the old shim out of here, we've got to add 10,000ths of an inch and it will be perfect. There will be no preload, but there'll be no float up and down. So as I said before, there'll be preload is when you put pressure on a bearing like this, and end float is when it's got a room to move. So that's that one. I'm going to stop this now and set up for the lay shaft. The lay shaft has a little bit of tolerance in it. It has 1,000th of an inch tolerance, either in end float or end float or preload. All right, I'm getting confused myself now because this is getting near dinner time. So when I do the lay shaft, what I've done is I'll just lift this out of the way, and I've put the drive gear for the oil pump in the centre of the hole. And just to give the dial gauge something to work off, because the hole's quite deep on this one, so the gauge drops inside. Again, what we're going to do, we're going to wiggle it around a little bit. Oh, that seems fine. And now we're going to adjust the gauge until it goes to 0. It's playing up because I put my weight on it. And now, again, we're going to get our handy pry bars and somehow find a place where we can get under that equally and pull it up. And look at that, 10 thou. That's not bad. That's not bad at all. In fact, it's a little bit different. I've wrote down there it was 0.83 and this is 0.86. So what's gone wrong there? So we need more shims in there. So maybe before it wasn't settled down enough. Let's just double check that. You see, this is a tricky thing. You see, it's gone back to a different point. Let's put it onto 0 again and check that. So this should really be 3 thou, but it isn't. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's a different gasket, I don't know. It could be the difference in gaskets. So that now is 6. But again, look, you see, it's not going back down to its original place. I wonder why I have to keep moving it. This is one of the strange things about doing gearboxes. Again, let's settle that down. See, it's moving because this little piece here is moving. Let's check that again. Put some preload on it. Yeah, we're going to have to put 6,000ths of an inch onto that shim. So it's a good job we checked it, because obviously there's something a little bit different in there. Don't know what it is, but that's why you have to always double check things. So we had 3 thou too much, or I measured the wrong shim originally, because I've got on top of the bench I've got shims everywhere. But we know on the lay shaft, where's our pen gone? We've got to add plus 0.003, and on the main shaft we've got to add 0.001. I'm gonna have to go and get some dinner. I'm gonna get something to eat and we'll come back to this. Just before I go to lunch, I just wanted to mention that to get the mag mount on, I had to take this bar off that held in the shaft for the reverse idler. So, and then the gear is now stopping it from dropping out when we flick the gearbox back over. But if you're just wondering what's holding that in, what's stopping it from flying about, you know, when it's been working, when we put this in the vehicle, is that shaft going to jump up and down and move around? Well, no, because you see there's a boss on the casting here. This holds in this shaft, so it can't go anywhere. Clever, eh? In the last scene that I did, which I did yesterday, I got a bit sidetracked after lunch and I didn't get back to this project. But I wanted to explain to you a little bit clearly about shims, because what had happened was I'd actually picked up the wrong shim for the gearbox. As you can see, I've got piles and piles and piles of shims, and I just picked up the wrong one. But I did put a smaller one in, and I seem to remember it needed 6 thou added onto the top. But I just wanted to do a sort of little daft diagram on the bench just to show you what I'm trying to think about preloads and shimming. So say for example we've got this little setup. So this piece here is your shaft, this is your bottom bearing, and this is your top bearing, and this black bit here, if my Sharpie will still work, it's getting a bit dry now, is your shim. And this piece is your top cover, and you can see there's a gap there. So what we're trying to do is we put a known thickness of shim in, which we're going to call A, and then we're going to, this is your dial gauge on the top. So we go with the shaft at the bottom, we're going to set that to 0. Then we're going to lift up the shaft. We're going to lift it up so that this shim will now take up the space of this gap. So that gap could be, so A equals 0, B, which we'll call the gap, equals 10. So we need to add a 10 thou shim to make that perfect with no end float or no preload. Now this is important. If we want to have, if the manual states that we need to have a 1/1000th of an inch preload, we need to add 1 thou to that total there, 10, to give us 11 thou. If it's saying on, for example, C, it needs an end float of 1 thou, we then need to make that 9. Alright, so that's quite simple. The problem is, these shims are around about £4 or £5 a piece, and they're all come in different increments, which is kind of tricky. Sometimes they're in 2 thou increments, so you can't really get it exactly right. So what I was saying earlier, there is a really good idea that's come from Ashcroft's, and they sell this kit here, depending on what gearbox it is. Like this set is for an R380 Suffix J gearbox, and what they do is they do some really thin little shims, and a complete range from thick, really thick thin shims to thin things, and sort of medium, all sort of a really good packet of shims. So then you can get it really accurate by putting one shim on top of another. So don't be afraid if you get a shim. Let's use this for an example. You need to get an extra 1/1000th of an inch, so you can actually put two together like that. It's still the same, but it does save you running out and buying shims, and then you find out, you put it all together and you find out you got the wrong one. So really a good investment is the Ashcroft sets, and they do those for all sorts of bearings, for the transfer case and all the gearboxes, so well worth having. So I think that makes it a little bit clearer what I was trying to do, and now we'll get back. I'm going to fit those correct shims to that gearbox, and then we'll get on to the next stage. Now I've got the correct shim in place. I've set the gauge to 0, and I'm going to do the same test by prying the shaft up, and you can see 0. Very good. The next thing, I've set this one up to the lay shaft. I'll see if I can quickly alter this. I'm not really sure. They are a bit tricky to set up. What you've got to do whenever you use a DTI gauge or a dial test indicator gauge is you've got to make sure that the pin has a sufficient range to move. So that's what I was saying about setting it halfway. You don't set it right down at the bottom, because you could actually miss your setting. So we tighten that up. We've got 0 at the top. Again, we'll just use our fine adjustment to take it to 0. Put the wedges, put the pry bars in, and we've got just, oh wait a minute, let's see that again, just let's settle that down. We should have a little bit of preload on there, not a free play. We had 1 thou to play with. So let's do that. Yeah, we got about 1 thou, so that's good. We're not too bad at all. I'm sort of happy with that. We can get away with that because you see the shims are, if we put a bigger shim in, it's going to be too tight. The next size up was going to be too tight, so I'm happy with that. So the next stage is to box it all up.